You are listening to the Enormocast.
Do you remember those halcyon days back in January, when every ray of sunshine felt like a warm hug from a celestial being? But now spring is here, and the tables are about to turn. The sun now stalks us like an enormous toddler with a magnifying glass. The burning orb, the Death Star, call it what you will. Just don't be caught out at noon on some edgy crimp fest, lest your feet swell and your tips shred. But Black Diamond has a way to fight back. My favorite piece of BD apparel, the Alpenglow hoodie. Built with UPF sun protection, pits for movement, and a hood designed to go under or over your helmet, and even some sort of odor control next-gen tech to help with that sour fear stink we all work up on the gnar. Or is that just me? Is that a thing with everybody? Man, do I reek after being scared. But frankly, if you aren't basically living in a Sun hoodie 24/7 in the summertime, you may in fact be an iguana, but at least now your tongue can go from 0 to 60 in 1/100th of a second. So don't just feel the burn, fight the burn. And check out the Alpenglow hoodie and all the great head-to-toe, summer, winter, go up, go down, nighttime, daytime, whatever time gear at blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite local shop. Does your partner suffer from try-it-again syndrome? Or one-hangitis? Or even worse, delusional performance disorder? Well, there really isn't a cure for DPD, except for a good smackdown. But it does probably mean that you've been belaying them for hours and hours on end, and are now suffering from BNP, or belaying neck pain, a stiffness in the cervical spine just below the occipital region of your thick skull. But now there's a cure for BNP resulting from DPD. Ask your doctor about belay specs, and when he doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, just smile and tuck that prescription for opiates away for your next overseas plane flight. But then ask several strangers about belay specs. Ask that cute barista at the coffee shop on the corner about belay specs. In fact, ask everyone you know about belay specs. Keep talking about belay specs until nobody wants to climb with you anyway. Problem solved. But if that doesn't work, then go to belayspecs.com and get yourself a pair. And don't forget to enter Enormocast at checkout for a discount and to help out the podcast. Side effects may include people thinking you're staring at them when you're not, old trad climbers rolling their eyes, people putting them on for the first time and saying, ooh, that's trippy, people insisting they don't like those weird glasses even though they've never even tried them. If you feel drowsy, nauseous, or rumbling in your stomach, horny, confused, or have strange, vivid dreams, this probably has nothing to do with belay specs, and is more likely from that bug you picked up in that backpacker's hostel in Rio after 5 too many caipirinhas. Belayspecs.com. Say adios to belayer neck pain.
Listen, where are you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
big
big
house.
place
We sold
outside
it
of
out.
town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold it out.
20,000 seats. We really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enorma at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is May 31st, 2021. It's about 10 o'clock here in Colorado, and this is episode 221 of the Enormocast. And on today's show, Lor Sabourin. I first noticed Lor because they climbed a 514 trad route, and that's still something of note and something of interest, versus 514 sport routes that get sent on the reg at your local crag. It's still a bit of a rare thing for anyone to climb on 514 trad because, frankly, there just aren't that many of them. And some of them you have to find in the middle of big walls. So that was interesting. And then Lor was presented by media as the first non-binary climber to climb 514 trad. And, that's a lot of qualifiers and something that Lor is a bit ambivalent about, as we'll find out in the interview. But I'm going to be honest. I kind of thought I knew exactly what non-binary meant. I had a vague idea, but once this got booked, I made sure I knew what we were talking about when it comes to a non-binary gender. Do you know what it means? Well, if you're a little vague about it too, it's a good thing you're here. And this issue, or at least the issue of trans people, and especially trans kids, has been on my mind lately. It's been in the subject of many of the podcasts I listen to. It is now the right's new boogeyman, pun intended, I guess, on man. But yeah, since they've mostly lost their battles, at least legally, against gay people and rights for gay people, they've switched over to this new one, this new, thing that they think can scare the ignoramuses. But I hope that we as a climbing community reject that fear. I think I've used this before, but to paraphrase Edward R. Murrow's dissent against McCarthyism, though I've seen this quote being used by the right to defend their xenophobia, but I believe that McCarthyism has more in common than disparate with Trumpism. So I'm going to take the quote back here. We will not walk in fear of one another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason. If we dig deep in our history, our climbing history, and our climbing doctrine, we can remember that we are not descended from fearful people. And here's the deal. When we sat down, Lor expressed ambivalence or not wanting to just make this a podcast about their gender, about what it means to be non-binary and all those sorts of things, sort of a 101 class and all of that. So what we really did here is we got to know each other, and we talked a lot about Lor's climbing, but then we started to talk about what it meant to be a climber who wasn't clear on who they were for much of their climbing career, wasn't clear on where they fit in, wasn't clear on how their body should feel, and someone who progressed through that and is progressing through that and becoming what they are, what they truly are. And in the end, Lor is an excellent and brilliant climber. And it was fun to talk about that too. I've tried just about everything to get you to drop some serious cash on high-end Sportiva climbing shoes, short of coming to your house and shoving your gnarled feet in them myself while you whimpered and giggled in equal measure. You gigglers know who you are. But obviously, a big part of the Enormo Nation does not want or need to drop serious coin on a terrain-specific shoe. You want something reliable, comfortable, and reasonably priced. So Sportiva's new additions are calling to you, my fair climber friends. The new Aragon is an all-day shoe that doesn't sacrifice performance and can slide on your footsies or into your shoe quiver for less than 100 bones. And the Zenit, rhymes with send it, is an intermediate shoe that can point you towards harder, steeper boulders and sport climbs. Both have no lace closures, something I've come to love on my Otakis, and are designed to be resold easily to save you even more money in the long run. So if comfort and fun is more appealing to you than downturn and pain, check out the new Aragon or Zenit at Sportiva.com or your favorite local shop. So you told me this quick little thing today that piqued my interest. Something about being from Michigan and going to the creek and some other places with the crew when you were like not very old.
No, so I didn't go with them. So I climbed at the gym, and then I had this group of friends that were all in their 20s.
Oh, okay.
And they would go and work in Yosemite in the summers, and then on their way back, they'd always climb in the creek and stuff. And they would come back, and it was like the big return of the real rock climbers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so then I was like, I want to be like them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I got confused, or I was like, okay. And you said, I think you were like 13 or something.
Yeah, I was probably like 13, 14. And I mean, yeah, we'd do like a send-off party for them before they left. And then, yeah, it was just like the most like psych infiltration when they came back. We'd go upstairs, we had this giant wooden crack machine, and they would be like, okay, we're going to teach you how to crack climb now, because like that's what you're going to need to do when you go to Yosemite.
And that was your dreams, and these folks were sort of your inspiration to eventually go out into the world as a climber.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I didn't really know what it meant.
Right.
You know, we used to go down to the Red River Gorge fairly often, but But yeah, I just had no concept, but I just knew it was really cool because they were really cool.
Yeah.
Like you're like 14 and they're 24 and you're like, okay.
Right. And real climbers going to real climbing places.
Yeah, totally.
Where in Michigan?
The Detroit area.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where you grew up.
Mm-hmm.
How long did you live there?
I lived there. I was born there and I lived there till I was 18.
Okay.
And then I went to school in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Really?
Yeah.
Where, like, up?
I went to Northern Michigan University, so I was in Marquette.
Okay.
Yeah, so, like, Michigan Ice Fest, that whole crew was kind of, they became, like, my second climbing family.
Uh-huh.
When I left home, so that was really cool.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, that's deep. I went to the Michigan Ice Festival.
Oh, sweet.
Some years ago, 3 now, maybe, or 4, I don't know.
Okay.
We lost, it's hard to remember because you lost the entire year to COVID, but
yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess it was like 3 years ago, it was ironic because, of course, I don't really ice climb.
Okay.
And I haven't for a long time, and that's pretty well known on the show.
Yeah.
But Bill, right? Bill?
Yeah, Thompson.
Yeah. I don't know, he thought it was amusing to invite me.
That's awesome.
For some reason.
And so you went.
Yeah. It was well. Well, I also hail from up northern Wisconsin.
Oh, sweet. So that's the UP is like more northern Wisconsin than anything.
Yeah, right. We share the border there, and it's divided from the rest of Michigan by a lake.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, and my folks live up there again now. I moved when I was 5, but so yeah, I was able to fly in and then grab a car and like drive up there. But we also drove up there in this huge snowstorm. So luckily I had a buddy with me. And then it was just like, it was a wild time. It was an interesting thing to dip into Munising, Michigan on the lake shore for a minute.
Yeah.
And ice climb little tiny ice climbs.
But when you think of it as like they're in Michigan,
right?
Some of them are big.
Yeah,
I mean, like compared to the rock climbing up there,
right.
I was so stoked because it was the first time that I'd ever had like local climbing that I could do. Like we had this traverse boulder problem that I could ride to on my bike, so I'd like put my crash pad on my back and ride there on my bike, and it was like the best thing in the world. I was like, I have local climbing now.
Right on.
And I think, so when ice season came around, it's like, there's multi-pitch climbing in Michigan. Like my mind was blown, even though it's ice climbing. It was like when I got to kind of explore what it would mean to live near climbing and maybe identify more as a climber.
What brought you into the gym to begin with?
It wasn't for a birthday party, but it was like my friend's birthday. I was going to
actually say that. I was going to be like, oh, it was a birthday party.
No. But I mean, pretty much it was like my friend's birthday. Her mom was like, yeah, you and a friend can go to the climbing gym. And so we went and she was super psyched. And I thought that the community was really cool. I just like enjoyed being there and like didn't really spend a lot of time outside as a kid.
Right.
But I had just gotten back. For my aunt's 50th birthday, she and 3 of her friends wanted to go up on a canoeing trip to the Boundary Waters because they used to do that in their 20s. And her friend had a 12-year-old daughter, and so they invited me along, so there'd be another kid. And it was really my first time, like, getting to be outside for an extended amount of time. Mm-hmm. And then I came back and, like, went to the climbing gym. Like, all of these people do things like that. So I think then my friend joined. They had, like, a kids climbing night. And it was mostly for, kind of 4 to 8-year-old range. And we were like 12, 13. But they let us go. And it was like pretty cheap to climb. And we just kind of like hit it off with the staff. And I just started hanging out there all the time.
Right. Yeah. So it's like it's kind of a story that's interesting where it becomes like this hangout. And like, I think a lot of climbers who started as kids but really got into it became like, I don't want to sort of belittle it by saying sort of mascot level or something like that, but it's like there's this kid who's around and who's stoked and like, yeah, Laura's around, let's like teach them the ropes or literally or whatever, you know what I mean? Was it kind of like that?
Yeah, I was very much mascot level.
Right.
Like definitely had like people at the gym that I would just follow around and like, but I mean, it was sweet, because I was having a hard time at school and like I'd come in, I had this one friend, Ron, who he would always be hanging out in the bouldering cave, and I'd walk in like with my school backpack on, and he'd be like, "So, what was the most awkward thing that happened to you in middle school today?" And I'd tell him, and he would just crack up, and then I would crack up, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess that was funny."
Right.
It wasn't like the end of the world.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, shit, middle school's brutal, right?
Middle school's brutal.
Yeah. Well, and it's cool because I think that's also sort of a theme I've heard is that, and people listening to the show have heard is this like, either if it's not, painful, it's at the very least a detachment from what's going on there, and for some people it's painful, and so because I've always felt like, the tradition of climbing is allowing sort of outsiders to come in and to be themselves. You may be able to tell me stories to contradict that. So
I could probably find stories in both directions, right? Like I could definitely find stories to support that. And like, yeah, of course there's stories that like don't line up with that. But
right. Well, let's get there later because we're still at the gym where you felt accepted.
Yeah.
And you had a good time.
Yeah.
And was it Ron?
Yeah, Ron.
Ron in the bouldering cave.
Yeah.
Let you blow off some steam when you showed up.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about what had gone well and what had gone wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mostly what had gone wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were mostly there.
Was going well. Anyway,
I mean, and so it was like, mostly there for like comedic relief. It was just like, let's just jump to that.
Right on. Yeah, yeah. So now you're thinking about being this climber and going out into the greater world, and that didn't happen till you started going to the Red, or how was it that you graduated from mascot level in the gym to mascot level on a red trip?
Totally. I think, we would just start. Actually, my mom's like a fairy godmother. She's amazing. There was one time I competed a little bit as a kid. Like I competed super recreationally, and we had gone to a climbing competition that was down near Kentucky, and I won a rope. And she was like, I went to the Red one time when I was a teenager and like had this epic hike where we got lost and we like ended up on the other side of the Red, and then we had to hitchhike back to our cars. And she's like, it'd be sweet to go back down there and check it out. And so we went down there with a rope, and I think I had like a couple of quick draws or something, but we had no clue what we were doing. And she was like, yeah, let's just see if we can, see what this rock climbing thing's about. Mm-hmm. And we got down there and I like bouldered some things, and then we did the same hike that she had done as a teenager, and we did the exact same thing, and we like ended up on the other side of the gorge and like hitchhiked with my mom back to our car, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But then from there we ended up like hooking up with some people from the gym and stuff, and she would drive us down there. Like she had a super high stress job, and like was just like she was like, I just get to unplug when I go with y'all.
Mm-hmm.
And she had like not really had a lot of opportunities to leave Detroit as a kid, or to play. And like we would always joke that like she and I learned to play together.
All right.
And yeah, my other sibling and like I grew up in kind of like this big extendo family.
Okay.
All my aunts and uncles were really close with us. And so, like, she was able to just kind of take off, and every once in a while, another friend from the gym would come.
It's funny you say that because I actually lived in Cincinnati when I was a little kid, like, I don't know, kindergarten to third grade or so. And my dad and my brother and I went on a camping trip to the Red. And, this would have been like long before there was bolted climbing there. Maybe any climbing, or maybe just the earliest people scrubbing around on cracks down there. But the funny thing is like, I mostly hated it,
Yeah.
I mostly hated camping. I mostly hated mosquitoes. I mostly hated like everything about it. We also went to Yellowstone once, and I also hated that. So, but my parents like never miss a chance to remind me now how much I hated all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. It's like cool that you clicked with it right away, because I had a sort of graduation period into enjoying the outdoors that took a while.
I was really into, like, I love tracking. I would go, even like in the city, I had a friend that we'd like go get, there's the Rouge River that runs through the Detroit area that's like kind of gnarly. Like there's a lot of trash and like not things that you'd want to be rolling around in, but we'd go down there and like cover ourselves in mud so that we were all camoed, and then we like crawl around like thinking we want to touch a deer this summer. Like that was our goal. And I just remember one time, this was a climbing friend, and we like got to the gym after doing something like that, and they're like, you're not allowed to come in. They just like hosed us off before we could go in.
Toxic Detroit mud.
Totally. But I was just, I just liked like being outside playing, and I think that transferred into climbing. really easily.
Right.
Yeah. But I think that definitely was still later for me. That was like once I was more of a teenager.
Right.
Like when I was younger, I played a lot of organized sports and just like
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty wild too, because like, were you, let me ask you this. We may not keep this in here, but were you into Tom Brown?
Yes.
I knew it.
Yeah.
You said touch a deer.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I was.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Totally.
Dude. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I had a friend that was like really into Tom Brown, but as a kid, I went to like the camp at Children of the Earth Foundation, which is like his.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's like an adjunct to the
Lucky.
tractor school. Yeah. It was sweet. But then I interned there as like an older teenager. So I like kind of, we got to like teach.
That's awesome.
But yeah, also like a little, like I think I was sheltered from like the problematic parts, right?
Oh, what are you going to blow my Tom Brown?
No, I'm not going to blow it.
Okay, no,
People can
I'm
do
sure
their own research, yeah.
No, I'm sure
I don't know enough about it.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah, Children of the Earth Foundation was
probably
like sick.
There was probably, the whole thing was probably all made up.
But
well, nevertheless,
yeah, it was sweet. And like, everyone there, like there were a bunch of climbers there, but like it was all the type of climbers that like climb barefoot,
right,
and like are just like soul climbers, which was cool for me to be exposed to as well.
No, I went through when you said tracking, and then you said the touch a deer thing. I was like, oh my god, because I went through that phase too. I was like, and it's a weird. Because I was in a suburban place.
Yeah.
Not a total city, but still. Gosh, I was probably into it by like 7th or 8th grade, maybe even freshman year. Whatever reason, I was prescient enough to understand that I needed to hide this from other people. That this penchant for going out into the woods and gathering like herbs and things and whatnot. Like in a suburban high school setting, like
totally.
You don't let everyone know about that. So I had this like sort of secret life where I would go out and try to start a fire with 2 sticks and all that sort of stuff, but not tell anybody. I had a couple friends. It was like, but we, this is what we do in our like private time.
Totally. Yeah, I definitely was. Yeah, I mean, I just wasn't like super social in high school, but I think like I was on the cross country team, and I probably talked about it with. I actually, like, I remember there was one thing I had gotten, I think from one of Tom Brown's books, where, like, they would run with water in their mouths. And I remember, like, one time we were doing, like, mile repeats, and I was trying to do them with water in my mouth, and my coach got so mad. Like, and, like, it was just, that was one time when it, like, came out, and I was like, yeah, you have to kind of, like, be a little more discreet.
I read this book about this kid who learned from, what was it, Apache, supposedly? Or
yeah.
I can't remember. That was probably all made up, is what I'm probably gathering from you now. Anyway, I mean, how could it not been? But anyhow, who cares?
I'm sorry that
No, I just remember too that there was like something about how they could like submerge themselves in ice cold water and stay warm.
Yeah.
And that seemed like really dangerous thing to tell a kid to
probably
go try
pretty
to do.
dangerous thing. Yeah, I think like definitely there was a lot of cultural appropriation in there that needs to be examined, but also there's like a funny story there of a lot of like kids connecting on it, but like feel like the fact that both of us were like, oh, this is so rad as a little kid.
Well, as a little kid, I mean, like, oh, your grandpa was, oh my God, my grandpa sucks. Like,
yeah, totally.
Although my grandpa was all right, both of them. But comparatively, I was like, why didn't I get that grandpa? Yeah. But yeah, that's awesome. We're on this whole Tom Brown kick. But yeah, we were, on the other side of a lake, although you're younger than I am, but yeah, on this same program, digging around in the woods, like the one piece of woods that I could find near my house.
There was actually this lot behind the climbing gym that was like, there was an electrical plant, I think is what it was. Never really understood like what was going on back there, but there was a lot attached to it, kind of like the surrounding area. And we'd go back there all the time and like try and figure out what animals were back there. And like, we found coyote scat. We were like, our minds were blown. Yeah. Spent so many hours back there.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Don't tell your acquaintances that you're out there playing with poop.
Yeah.
But you would be stoked. Like, I don't know. Let's look in the book. Like, which one is this? What
totally.
is this?
Yeah. And like, luckily,
what has he been
like,
eating?
Yeah. And I actually,
there's a mouse bone.
had this, like, by the time I was, like, later in high school, I had a whole crew at the climbing gym of, like, friends my age.
Right.
And, like, it was funny that you were saying that because there were, like, definitely a couple of my friends that were super psyched on that. And then there were a couple of kids that were just, like, would always just be like, those goobers, like, what's going on with them? And so it was, like, kind of this joke in our friend group of, like, certain of us that, like, wanted to take apart poop and certain people that were, like, wanted to, like, make fun of people taking apart poop. But I had a whole journal that I would, like, take it apart in and draw it and stuff. Oh, yeah.
It's so funny talking about it now because it seemed, like, so rad and important at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're just, like, you were out there, like, in a vacant lot, like, poking sticks in what, who knows? Like, you thought it was coyote, who knows?
Someone's dog.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's coyote.
It has to be.
Oh God. Anyway, moving on from our Tom Brown moment. It sounds like, I mean, did you have a lot of freedom
As a kid?
Yeah, as a kid.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, my parents were pretty chill and, like, I mean, there was a lot of pushback. Like, I remember I really wanted to be allowed to just, like, go sleep out in the woods, but, like, in the, you know, like, the quote unquote woods, like, in like, kind of urban suburb area. And I remember that being, like, a big argument with my parents of they're like, no, you can't just go live out there.
Right.
And,
reasonable.
There were reasonable boundaries. Yeah. But as far as, like, yeah, I definitely.
It's so unfair.
It's so unfair. Or, like, my sister and I were just reflecting on this. It was this, I loved riding my bike just because I could get places without needing to get rides. And so in Detroit, we basically were locked in between, like, Woodward and Telegraph, which are these ridiculous, they're highways, they're not free, like, expressways. So, you know, they're separated by, like, a median and there's lights, but they're, like, 5-lane roads, essentially, where the speed limit's, like, 50, 55.
Mm-hmm.
And people just, like, I mean, they shoot down, like, they'll go, like, 70 on these roads that are not actually expressways.
Right.
And I always just, like, didn't understand why my parents didn't want me to go, like, ride my bike down Woodward or Telegraph. I was like, but it's the most efficient way to get places. Right. You know, I'm, like, 9 years old and they're like, no, you can't just, like, ride down Telegraph on your bike. Right. There's not even a bike lane. And so, like, things like that, I thought that they were really strict, but in retrospect, they were just, like, understood how the city worked and didn't want me.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, they didn't want me doing that stuff when I lived in the suburbs.
Yeah.
It was a totally different operation, you know?
I mean, this was, it was like a suburb, like an urban, but it was like a suburb of Detroit. It wasn't.
Yeah, but I can picture it sort of like a sort of, you know, just adjacent urban kind of more setup. We were way out.
Yeah.
I actually had plenty of woods.
Yeah.
To play
That's fair.
Truth be told.
Yeah, I think it definitely had, like, a fair amount of freedom, though. Yeah. Both of my parents are, like I joked, my mom would fit in super well in Sedona. She, like, does a lot of, like, energy healing and is really into, like, crystals and alternative kind of ways of approaching life and in like the best way, because she's also, like, a really awesome, like, has that, like, Midwest hospitality way of treating the world and just, like, very welcoming person. And, you know, my dad lived in his van when he was younger, and, like, he'd, like, traveled all around the US. So I think both of them just had kind of a different, like, they, you know, they were strict in some ways, but they also, like, gave us our space to do our own thing.
They were trying to keep you alive.
Yeah.
AKA strict.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly.
As a parent now, I understand this idea of, like, well, our main thing is they have to come home alive every day and get up in the morning and stuff. So, yeah, it's funny. Because I try to pull all that shit. The same thing. Like, why can't I just go and sleep, like, down by the river in the or whatever? I slept out. I got a really nice sleeping bag when I think I was probably in 8th grade. And so Christmas Day, the night of Christmas Day, I slept in the front yard in our like suburban.
Totally.
And my mom was just like, yeah, I was like ready for like the police to show me, be like, why is there this homeless person in your front yard in a sleeping bag?
I mean, the context there, though, right? Like, they probably, yeah.
Yeah. So they let me do it. I was out there in the damn front yard the whole night.
Oh, yeah.
All mummified.
I definitely got away with, like, sleeping on the back porch or maybe on the roof. I can't remember whether the roof one got squashed because it wasn't totally level.
So... So let me ask you this. Let's get back to climbing now that we've spent a good solid chunk on that stuff. You know, for me, and we'll see if this sort of parallels as well, is that, you know, I got into backpacking and I actually used to hang out in the Bondi Waters that you mentioned earlier, your aunt's trip up to there. But then like climbing just like clicked in and took over, and it fed a lot of the same impulses of sort of exploration and adventure. And it just like, I was like, okay, now this seems like for real wild and woolly and like what I've kind of been looking for. Like, how did it fit in for you as far as supplanting some of that stuff you were doing in high school and then you wanting to go, you know, to college somewhere there was a rock to climb?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it definitely fulfilled that side of things. But I think the other thing, I was a pretty serious athlete as a runner. And I think climbing kind of filled that side of it too, of like, I found I was really psyched on the athletic side of climbing, and then I could see how the two like combined. So I could be outside and this kind of exploratory adventure side, and then could also pursue it as a sport. And then that really clicked. I had a pretty intensive hip surgery my senior year, and it just like completely took me out of running for few years, but I could get back to climbing pretty quickly. Like I was able to climb probably maybe 5 months out from it, which it was one of the first activities I could do again. And I think at that point, I kind of like I switched my psych for like athletics from running to like focusing more on climbing from an athletic side. And then when I moved up to the UP and it like could combine the two, and climbing in the UP is just inherently pretty adventurous because there's not much of it. And, you know, so right away I was like getting to go with friends and develop routes and just like explore little micro crags that people didn't really know about. And that side of it was really cool for me too. It's like just to be able to combine that psych.
So we talked about middle school being rough. Like, did the athletics or the sports allow you to, you know, sort of like find a place?
It definitely let me... I had a space to like make some friends that I wouldn't say I like, it made me feel like totally safe at school, but it definitely, it gave me something to like look forward to. And I had, you know, I was on a relay team in track, and we were all close, and there were a couple of kids, like by the time kind of my sophomore, junior year came around, I had a couple really close friends in school.
We're kind of like dancing around it, but you know, we're talking about being uncomfortable in school, but we're not talking about why that is. So,
like, I think you're like leading towards I was uncomfortable at school because of my gender identity, because I'm very, like, I mean, at this point, I'm very visibly queer and non-binary, but at the time, like, knew that information about myself and didn't feel comfortable sharing it. And I think that was a part of it. I think because of that, I just felt like very awkward around like being in my body and like being able to like I felt like I was getting all of these different cues about how to be, like how to fit in. And I was like, oh shit, like I cannot figure out how to like work out that role. Maybe I'll like try this other role. And like, it was, you know, you're getting so many cues about how to be, like how to become a human, but specifically around gender at that age. Like it's very much like the boys are over here and the girls are over here. And if you don't fit into one of those groups, it's hard enough if you do. You have to like put on all of these costumes and try and like prove that you're like the best version of one of those two things. When you're not either of them, you're just like totally out to swim.
Right.
You know, it's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to even start.
Did that lead to any real trouble for you? I mean, as far as like, you know, were you able to kind of keep your grades up and do what you need to do to get through school?
Well, I was like a total perfectionist.
Okay.
Which is problematic in a lot of ways, right? It's actually something that in my adult life I've like looked at, because I guess the best way of saying it is you can like play to these ways that people will accept you, which is like being a straight A student or being like an all-star athlete or something. And most of the time that's playing to the privileges that you have. So like someone that couldn't do those things, but was also queer, like if I'm saying like this is the way I'm finding acceptance, then I like automatically exclude them.
Sure.
So I've had to pick it apart, but I was a perfectionist as a kid, and like, you know, had 4-point and was like the vice president of the National Honor Society, but actually my senior year, like when I had that hip surgery, and I also had like the year before my senior year, was like assaulted by someone who then like basically like wrapped a lot of that up around my gender identity. And so like senior year for me was just like, I kind of just like didn't perform anymore.
Right.
Like I was in survival mode.
Well, and you're like, you had your athletics that you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
You had climbing that had, you know, at least temporarily was gone for you. So aside from what you just said, it's like a miserable sort of existence. Were you nervous or excited to go to college then to get, and why did you pick going up to the UP?
So I had always intended to pay for my own school. And I had planned to do that through running, and I couldn't at that point, right? Like I wasn't going to get on a running scholarship. And so I used to eat lunch in the physics room. My physics teacher was like a total amazing, just like superhuman. And she actually, like when I had my hip surgery, she came to my house like once a week and like not only taught me physics, but also like taught me calculus, and would like make sure that all my other schoolwork was on top. Like she like kept me very honest with my schoolwork that year. So I'm hanging out and she's like, hey, there's this scholarship competition. You have to go up to Marquette. And I was like, I hadn't even really heard of Marquette before. I had one friend that had gone to Northern. But he kind of like in my mind, he was like I think he went for like a year and then he dropped out. He wasn't really like someone that wanted to go to college. So I just didn't have it on my radar as somewhere that you could go, and like, but she was like, you should just go apply for this. Like she knew I was kind of feeling a little desperate. And so went up there, and it was September or October maybe. I was still on crutches for my surgery. It was the fall, so it was like it wasn't winter yet, essentially. So like I never went up there in the winter before and so I went up and I'm like, I'm like, it's 60 and like it's beautiful up here, and like you can be outside all the time. And did the scholarship competition and like ended up getting a full ride, and that just made it. It was this really hilarious scholarship too. It was based on your standardized test scores and grades, but also it was like this leadership competition. So we were all put in rooms together and then given these like games to play and like problem solving tasks, and they evaluated your leadership skills. So I guess I was a good enough leader to win a leadership competition.
Well, I mean, we keep talking about this place, the UP. I don't even think Upper Peninsula. So you know, there's worldwide listeners. So it's this chunk of Michigan that's stuck to the top of Wisconsin, bordering some lakes.
A lot of lakes.
Yeah, the Superior on one side, Lake Michigan on the other side, and it's connected to Michigan by a great big bridge, and Canada's in there somewhere. Well, they're on the other side of the lake.
It's like, Canada's like scooping around the upper
So it's like the middle of nowhere. I mean, I think Americans who know about it even are like, well, shoot. I mean, it's its own place, like the Upers and the UP. Yeah. And, you know, the reason I ask that is because it's like, I think it might be a place where if you were growing up queer, like you said, it would be in a lot of people's minds, a place to avoid. But it sounds like it had enough for you to be successful there. Does that sound right?
Yeah, Marquette's kind of a bubble.
Okay.
Like in the UP, there's definitely like Marquette has pulled in because of the university, and it tends to pull in a lot of people that are like, there's a really big art scene and music scene there, and so it's really
it's a university anyway.
Yeah, so, yeah. It's definitely a different leaving the UP, and even one of my best friends from high school, from like climbing in high school, went to Michigan Tech, which is in Houghton. And Houghton's way more of what you would think of as like more traditional UP, like pretty conservative. But Marquette had a lot of my college roommate called them lumberjack lesbians. And like, I don't really know how to describe that in any other way, but there were definitely like other.
It paints a picture.
Yeah. There were other queer people up there.
Right on.
But I think it would have been a really hard place to go if you were pretty effeminate and non-binary. Like that would be really hard.
You're up there climbing, and you're like eking out like, what is the climbing up there? Because I know it's like glacial country, and even where my folks are, there's like rocks around. There's actually like, you can find stuff on Mountain Project, these little scrubby boulders and stuff. And I've seen it up there on the border too. So what's the climbing like up there? There's granite exposed. I know that much.
Yeah, it's like the stuff in Marquette's volcanic.
Okay.
I don't think it's it's definitely, it's not granite. It's like kind of like a black, maybe like a tuft or something, but I'm botching it. Like I don't actually know what the rock is. I did a project on it in college, but that was a while ago.
You just flush that.
Yeah, totally. Like you let go of the information that you don't need.
Right.
And it's a lot of like in-cut edges and climbs pretty similar to maybe basalt climbing. There's stuff right around Marquette that's pretty cool. There's some stuff that's right on the shore of Lake Superior, where you have to wrap in and climb out, kind of similar to like the North Shore in Minnesota.
Right.
And then there's also some crags maybe an hour or two outside of Marquette that have like 3-pitch climbs, and just it's like kind of slabby or vert.
Right.
Like, I mean, nothing exceptional, but it is exceptional because it's in the middle of Michigan.
Right.
Which is not somewhere that's known for rock climbing. I'd say the major catch is that it's like a 9-month ice season and like a 3-month. I have a memory of it was my friend's graduation day, so it was like beginning of probably like middle of May or beginning of June even, and we cross country skied out to do like this one single pitch rock climb that we thought might be dry, and it was like it was seeping, and there was like 3 feet of snow on the ground, and we tried to climb it anyway, and like he ended up rock climbing in his mountaineering boots, and like it took a big whip because of that, but.
Sounds like a right adventure, though.
Yeah, like it was always an adventure.
Right. So when did you sort of think, like, gosh, I'm pretty good at this? I'm, and not to be like, oh yeah, I'm the best, but just, I remember when I started to feel like, yeah, I can do. Not necessarily I'm good at this compared to other people, but I can do this. Like, this is my thing. Did that had happened earlier, or when was it like, oh, this is kind of looking like my life?
Maybe.
Because it's your life now.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like, I was like, oh, I haven't had that moment yet, Chris. But I mean, when I like
you better have it soon, because you pretty much, that's what you're doing now.
I think that like, so my freshman year of college, someone came up to teach a single pitch instructor course at the university, and I had become friends with all the local climbers, like kind of a group of guys, and I think, like 30 to 50 range, and they kind of, again, like maybe similar to when I was 14 and all the 24-year-olds, but they kind of like took me under their wing a little bit and let me start climbing at their home walls. And so they convinced me to sign up because they needed another person. And so then I ended up like taking the guide course, and I thought it was really cool, and then went down to Kentucky and started guiding in the summers.
Okay.
And I think at that point, at first I thought I wanted to go to Kentucky because I was interested in maybe going to med school. And I was like, oh, I'll be on this. They have a search and rescue team that's actually like kind of cool. They do high angle stuff a lot. And so I volunteered for that. And I thought that would be my main thing. And then I'd just guide to support myself while I was down there. And then I ended up kind of hating search and rescue because it's kind of brutal. And and it's boring and brutal at the same time. And then loved guiding, like just absolutely loved being able to educate and also being able to work in climbing and like share this thing with people that I loved. And so I think at that point, like when I was living in Kentucky, that was when I almost dropped out of college and was just like, I'm just going to rock climb. But then made a kind of a pact with the person who owned the guide service, my friend Brian. He's like, okay, you have to go finish school, but if you finish school and you come back, we'll give you full-time work. So I went back up. That was my third year and just took a bajillion credits and like finished my degree and then went back down there. So that, I think that was when I started to really see myself as someone that could rock climb proficiently and be able to work in the industry and
make a life of it.
Yeah.
What did you graduate as?
I switched my major from pre-med to, it was outdoor recreation, leadership, and management.
Okay.
And then took some classes in the exercise physiology direction. And so it ended up being a minor in biology, I think, but I was studying like exercise phys stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sort of fit in.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
Totally.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned, I've kind of got three markers in my head of these people who sort of like turned up at the moment and told you the right thing at the moment. You started with your mom. It sounds like that was, a super important part of your life, obviously, although it's not an easy assumption all the time, especially with queer kids, but then you've got this physics teacher you mentioned, and then you've got this person who's like, go back to college. Like, you need to do these things. Like, do you feel lucky or has it just been that you've surrounded yourself occasionally with the right people?
I feel super lucky, and I think I also am a good listener. Like, I feel like most people probably do have those people in their lives, but it's really hard to listen.
Right.
I've always enjoyed listening, but I definitely feel like I've also been super lucky to just be surrounded by really awesome humans. Yeah,
I'm sure it's just probably not all the time, but it sounds like your story has these markers where it happened at the right time and the right person sort of did what they needed to do.
Yeah, I've had a huge support system. Yeah.
That's super cool.
A lot of people just like making sure I knew I was loved.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of climber... This is an old school Enormocast question. So, like, what kind of climber are you now? Because, one of the things that just popped on the radar, 2 or 3 months ago was, climbing, what is it called? Montana Weed Connection Fist Bump? What,
East Coast Fist Bump.
East Coast Fist. I'm confusing it with the Montana Weed Connection in the creek. But yeah, it's 514 gear route, so pretty rad. And like, that's not something that is even that common, and definitely not a lot of people climb at that level on gear. What brought you like your essentially bolted climbing probably in the red? So yeah, talk about what kind of climber you are and what motivates you to pursue something like that. And, what was your journey from Kentucky then that led to, now you live in Flag and you climb all sorts of things?
Yeah. So when I was in Kentucky, but I was guiding, right? And like, it was a big thing. I knew how to trad climb. Like I had learned in high school from, like some friends, and then had, actually like my friend Elena Arenz, she's a guide in the New River Gorge. And I, at one point, like actually went out with her for a day just to make sure that I actually knew what I was doing, when I was in high school. And then, so like started guiding just in like single pitch world, and my coworkers and the kind of co-owners of the gym, they're like, well, you have to be able to climb 510 on gear to take your rock guide course. And like, obviously you want to take your rock guide course. I was like, well, yeah, of course I do. And so that summer I was like, I'm going to start climbing 510 on gear. And I was climbing probably like 512 sport climbs at that time. So I was epicking trying to get this like 510 on gear. I would always get super scared and I'm like, I'm going to send one clean this summer. I'm going to do it. And I think I did that summer. And then like the next summer after that, like, it's like, well, if I can climb 510, maybe I can climb 511. And then there was this one 12A called Bloodline that my friend and I went and like scrubbed because no one had climbed it, I think, since like the first ascent, because it's a 12A gear line in Kentucky that's like a little heads up. And I'd actually caught a friend on it 2 years before, and he had taken this giant whip in the crux and like flipped upside down, and almost like I barely kept him off the ground. So I had it in my head that it was super sketchy, but it turned out that he just like had gotten pumped and didn't get the cam in.
Right.
And so did that summer, and then that was also, I was starting to feel like, okay, maybe I can push it on gear. Like if I can climb 512 on gear, that could open things up. And I was looking through the guidebook and I was like, there are no 512s on gear here. Like there's like 2 or 3 more, or I mean, there's more than that, but there was nothing with like stars in the guidebook. Yeah,
worthy of doing.
I was not in a mecca of like hard gear climbing, and so I had a friend who was guiding with me, and he's like, "Well, I'm going to the creek in the fall. Like you should when we wrap up. Like the guide season, ironically, in Kentucky is like busiest in June, July, and August into September, and then it kind of rolls off,
right?
Because it's mostly tourists." So, and then I had some college friends that were going to the creek, so they all convinced me to roll out that way. And so I just like packed up everything into my Subaru and like drove out there and ended up staying in the creek for a month and got super psyched on crack climbing. Because up to that point, I didn't really actually crack climb that much. Because everything on gear was more like cracks that had a bunch of face holds around them. And then moved to Flagstaff, where, there's a ton of really awesome bouldering and a ton of really great trad climbing and like some sport climbing, but not a ton. Mm-hmm. And that was when I think I really just started investing like all of my energy into trad climbing. So now I would say most of my hardest climbing is more than even gear climbing. Like my hardest climbing is crack climbing.
Okay.
Specifically, but I definitely still love doing all of the things. Yeah, I still love sport climbing. I go bouldering. I call myself a hobby boulderer.
Well, how'd you end up in Flag?
So I was looking for a place to kind of settle for the winter because I was just still in my car and I couldn't even like sleep in my car. I just had kind of like piled all of the things into it. So I needed somewhere to home base a little bit. And my friend from college, one of my roommates, had moved to Flag and was working at Snowball at the ski resort. And she's like, I could probably get you a job in the ski rental shop. And I had skied maybe like 10 times in my life. Like I didn't really know what I was doing. But she like got me a job there. And so I moved there just because there was somewhere to work. And she had friends and she like hooked me up. I was living in a laundry room in this house with like a bajillion people who worked for the Conservation Corps. And then a weekend I went to a yoga class, and the yoga center was owned by the same owner as the climbing gym. And we ended up like doing yoga next to each other. And then afterward, he noticed I had a bunch of climbing stickers on my water bottle. And we talked for like 10 minutes. And he's like, hey, you want to interview at the climbing gym? And then ended up interviewing like that week and then started working there.
Okay.
And then.
How long have you been down there?
7 years.
Okay. A long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So another question I always ask when we're talking kind of about this arc, sort of story arc, is when you also start you're guiding, when you also started kind of thinking about like, well, what if I sort of became, if not a sponsored climber specifically, but like a name, like or did that happen sort of organically? In terms of like, how did you suddenly, I can imagine you show up at the creek, you're just another, doofus from Kentucky that shows up at the creek or whatever, like, and then where did that kind of start happening? This idea that, okay, well, I'm a guide, I'm a climber, it's my life, and then I have this opportunity to be sort of a public persona in climbing, sponsored, vocal advocate, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if I put. Maybe there's 2 sides to that.
Okay.
Like one, so I work now as like the training leader for the Rock Warriors Way.
Okay.
Or for the Warriors Way, but most people know it as the Rock Warriors Way. Like became a trainer for them and was working really closely with Arno and who owns the company. And I think when I started teaching and specifically traveling to teach, that's when I started just telling my stories about climbing, because I realized that it influenced my ability to teach and like people's interest in learning the material, and just when they could see that I had a personal connection to it and they could read my stories about climbing, then they could also connect to it. And then I think also just Flag is kind of a small town, and so if you send a hard pitch there, people know.
Right.
You like come into the gym later and everyone's like, no way, you sent your project, know? And it becomes, so it's like it's different from showing up at the creek or something and just climbing a thing. It's like if you send a hard line at the crag, it's not a secret.
Right.
You know, whoever saw it tells their friend, and then they tell their friend. And I think since I worked at the gym, I was just really visible.
Mm-hmm.
So I just became someone that was maybe a leader in that community that like allowed me to be a little bit more comfortable.
Okay.
And just, yeah.
So when you said like, you know, telling your stories about climbing with your clients or whatever, what do you mean by that?
Oh, I mean, even just being on Instagram, you know, like I didn't have an Instagram before that.
Right.
Or like writing pieces for different things about my climbing, or like being willing even to tell stories, right? Because I kind of, like, I think before that, you weren't really, in my mind, you know, in the UP, like you don't talk about your climbing.
Sure.
You know, that's not cool. And I think my like Detroit friends too is like, now they think it's cool that I share my stories. But at the time, it kind of was like not something that I had been trained to do with my climbing.
Mm-hmm.
But then I saw that it was useful for teaching and even just help students find me as a teacher.
Right.
You know, and that was important. And as a coach.
Yeah, it's a question I've always got in my head, because it's like, I don't know, it just can just happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we have social media and things like that, which has changed the story. And there's always actually been this push and pull that you're talking about in climbing, about, you know, the just shut up and climb and like don't brag, and that was like an old school kind of idea that has been a bit blown to pieces, and a lot of people, you know, lament that it's been blown to pieces. But the thing I sort of push back against is if you choose to do it but then you want to lament it,
totally
seems to be a bit annoying kind of a thing, you know what I mean? Like someone who's a sponsored climber that doesn't want to talk about what they've done.
Yeah.
Which those people exist.
Totally.
Still.
Yeah.
Not for long. They don't, at least not as sponsored climbers. But,
yeah.
But it's interesting because you're just like, well, there's nothing wrong with it, you know, like if it's presented in a way that's helpful.
And if you're being intentional, right? Like whenever I'm putting something out online or writing something or teaching, I'm just like, okay, I should really know why I'm doing this.
Right.
And I should know what the message I'm sharing is. And if I don't, like, you know, why am I putting the energy into it? Because I could do other things with that energy. But if I have a reason to put something out and it matters to me, this is a way that I can share it.
Right.
And that's kind of always, and that's actually helped me stay away from feeling like really jaded about social media.
Sure.
Because if you know the reason why you're putting something on it every day, then you don't have to like have this existential crisis every week when things, you're aware of the flaws of of like the tool that you're using, and you're also aware of why you're using it.
Right.
It just like, it's relaxing.
An existential crisis every week doesn't sound relaxing. Yeah.
No, but there are a lot of people that are having weekly existential crises about social media.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. No, I mean, we talk about it a lot on not just this show, but on the Run Out, just how it's affected the way people interact with climbing has been kind of profound, I think. And that's just a sliver of what it's done with how people interact with each other and the whole world. So I can, you know, it's definitely something you have to like, it's like a hot coal. You have to like make sure it don't let it burn you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, so we kind of talked about your gender identity a bit in high school. But that's been part of telling your story as well. You know, you're a climber and you're just going about your business. You're learning to guide. You're trying to make your way in the industry, as it were, make a life of it. When did that become something that you sort of wanted to incorporate in your story in a sort of vocal way? Or how did it happen?
I guess, I was thinking about it. I think that it naturally, like, I had just really downplayed, like, there actually was, like, for a very long time, I was like, well, I just, like, don't really have a gender. I'm just Lor. And that worked for a while, but it actually, like, I was having a really hard time, like, in my own healing process of, there was a certain point where I don't have a gender was kind of like, I don't totally need to, like, own the space that I'm living in. And I wasn't really, like, fully taking care of myself, and was just, like, trying to navigate that and realize that it was going to be really important to just, it was like I was carrying this giant duffel bag that was full of shit, you know, and I was like, like, and I felt like I needed to like hide that thing from everyone. And I was like, at a certain point, maybe it would just be easier to externalize it because I was so afraid of how people were going to respond.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was like internally dealing with that all the time, trying to hide it. I was like, maybe if I put it out there, like they can deal with it, and like whoever is going to be like mean in response, which at that point I had kind of realized would be less, like would not be the majority of people, would not be cruel. And then it's also on them. It's less in my head of this is all these terrible things are going to happen. And I'm more like living in the reality of what actually happens.
Right. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just that inevitably, because so much of my community is the climbing community,
Mm-hmm.
when I was like shared my gender identity and talked with people about switching the pronouns that they use for me and just like being more aware of my identity, that just naturally was the climbing community as well.
So how long ago was that about? I mean, I asked that because I want to know like how far into what we've been talking about you were, where you were just kind of like, no, I'm just a little, different,
just
or
human,
or all those sorts of things.
It wasn't that long ago.
Right.
Yeah, it was kind of started in 2018 into 2019. So like only like maybe 3 years ago.
Did you have people to counsel with about this change that you were going to make?
Yeah.
Or was it like something you did on your own?
I mean, the biggest person, like my fiance, Amanda, is fucking amazing. And she and I talked about it all the time. And we're just like, because she knew that about me, it wasn't like, and it wasn't a secret.
Right,
like,
I would hope.
Like, yeah, I mean, not just with her, but like also with like my really close, like my inner circle. It was like, no one was like, Lor, you have to like talk about your gender identity. Mm-hmm. But if someone had asked like my sister, my best friend, like, hey, what gender is Lor? They'd be like, you should ask them,
Right.
Like, and they even like my sister would kind of like use gender neutral pronouns for me fairly often, even like before I ever asked her. She's also a social worker, and like she was an awesome resource for me as well, of just like she had a lot of friends in the queer community who she was able to connect me with. So I had people, but I also had a lot of people who I hadn't talked to that I was close with.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of a combination of like wanting to just get it over with and just kind of tell as many people as quickly as possible, but also wanting to have intentional conversations with people. And then I got really tired really quickly of doing that. Like, it's just like...
yeah, I get it. I totally get it. Actually, and it's interesting because you're not a different person than before you said, I'm this.
Yeah.
You're the exact same person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's because I've been thinking about it a lot since we booked this, and just how strange that is, that this, whatever you want to call it, admission or like clarification or anything like that, for some people fundamentally changes who you are, when in sort of the molecular sense nothing changed.
Yeah.
2 minutes before you said it out loud, you were exactly the same person.
Yeah.
But it's like it blows everybody's minds.
Yeah.
In this kind of like almost super immature way. You know?
Yeah. I think the hard thing is like, so I came out to a lot of people as gay when I was really, when I was young, like right as soon as people were getting into relationships, I was like, okay, I know that like, and actually my gender identity is pretty fluid, but at the time I knew it was different, right? So I would like, and in that situation, you're not, unless you're talking to someone who you might date, like people are like, oh, I don't care, like that doesn't change anything with you, like, yeah, that's information about you that I made. Like I even had some people, and this is not a way that you should respond to anyone when they come out, but they're like, I don't care, like how does that influence me? Why do you even tell me? Like that's your own business. So people will respond that way. With gender identity, and specifically being non-binary, and specifically asking people to change the pronouns that they use for you, they act like you just asked them to do this monumental thing that they are like, it's so, like, the most common response is like, but that's so hard. Like, my brain just doesn't work that way. People with PhDs will tell me that. They'll be like, my brain just doesn't work that way. I just can't wrap my head around it. And it feels quite, I guess maybe that's partly why it's exhausting. Because you're like, well, I guess that's okay then. Like, I guess if your brain can't wrap itself around it, we're at an impasse. So I'm not going to, like, keep demanding it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you don't need to be friends with everyone in the world.
Yeah, but unfortunately,
right?
It's like, you know, getting those responses from like
people who are close to you.
People that are really close. Yeah,
right.
It really hurts.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the brain thing in terms of like, you know, I'm 50 years old. And so to call you they trips over my tongue, right? It just does.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do my best because you've asked me to do that.
Yeah.
Just like if someone said, I'd like you to call me Barbara because that's my name, I'd be like, cool, I'm going to call you Barbara and not Jim.
Yeah.
Because you've asked me to call you Barbara.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, yeah, it's just a strange thing to put. I mean, I get it. Like, you're a little uncomfortable. And like I said, I'm going to screw it up. But if you're making good intent to do that, then Laura is not going to punch you in the face because you screwed up their pronoun.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, but it's all about good faith and just being like, yeah, it kind of reminds me of the mask thing. Like, it's a little piece of cloth on your face. Like, just fucking like, it's not going to kill, like, get over it, you know? Like, I don't know, make an effort. It's wild. I've been thinking about it a lot. So I'm glad that you've talked a little bit about the pronoun thing because, you know, like I said, it trips off my tongue in a weird way a little bit for a while. And then it's like, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, like, you know, I don't have to get super into it, but one of the first things that someone that was really close to me when I was a little kid, like when I came out to them, one of the first things they said was like, well, you need to change that because people are going to hurt you. Like, and, you know, I think I was 9 or 10. And then getting hurt, you know, as a teenager and then as an adult, I was like, okay, you know, I had to really like kind of be like, were they right? You know, am I just a person? So then when people like are like, you're inconveniencing me or this isn't comfortable for me, it's hard not to read that as like this person might be so uncomfortable that they hurt me. And whether that's like emotionally or physically, right? And so I think that's something people really vocalizing, saying like, this is really uncomfortable or this, I'm not going to do that, or like pushing back on it. I think maybe it takes more emotional energy than people realize because you have to go through this whole like process of caretaking for them, but also like taking care of that little human inside of you that's like, you're going to get hurt. Like people are out to get you, you know, and and some people are, right? Sure. Like people really are taught to be afraid of trans people. And a lot of people, when they're saying pronouns are hard for me, they're not actually going to be violent. But I have to like put a lot of effort into like reminding myself that. Yeah.
Well, it's been a fucking tough 4 years too. So,
unfortunately, like this year, I think a lot of people are so relieved with the election. And I mean, I'm relieved with the election too. But what we've seen, right, is a backlash.
Sure. Yeah.
And really, I mean, like it's like really hard to watch for anyone in the trans community, but specifically for like trans adults watching trans kids. So many states have bills.
It's so heartbreaking.
And I mean, these kids are being told to go into court and to testify for their own rights. And you just look at, you know, we were like, I think a lot of trans adults were like, if we get out there, if we're vocal enough, we can save this next generation of kids from the same trauma. And we're looking at it now and we're like, well, they're going to have to deal with more trauma than we did. Because at least we were able to like hide as kids more. And that's a different kind.
Right.
But it's like seeing them just be so attacked.
Yeah.
You just want to like...
I mean, it's like I have a 5-year-old and I don't know, you know, he's just a 5-year-old right now. Yeah. And so it's like, oh no, it just breaks my heart. And I've been paying so much attention to it in the last month because it's really been, you know, forefront on a lot of podcasts and stuff I listen to, and it's super rough. But talking back to like when you did it, was a couple years ago, well into your climbing career. You were talking about this duffel bag. Was it affecting your climbing and the way you interacted with the community? And then what changed when you sort of emptied the duffel bag, if we want to continue the analogy?
Yeah, I was in a really, like, right before, when it got to the point where I was like, this has to happen, it was very apparent in my climbing. I've been a very focused person in my climbing. Like, it's not always like, this is my project and I must send it, but I always know where I'm going. If I'm trying to, like, get solid at on-sighting a certain grade so that then I can go after, like, an objective that inspires me, I always just like have somewhere that I'm going.
So you never left that high school kid behind?
Totally. No. Yeah, no, definitely not. Like, yeah, you can like look at my training log for the fall. Totally.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I think I have like a really strong balance of like being able to set that and then being able to like just love on what I'm doing. I feel healthy about it.
Right,
but that summer it was like just totally directionless. Like I would go out climbing and just felt like my brain was totally fuzzy, and I went on an alpine trip and I was so anxious. I just started like puking one night. I was so physically sick and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And finally went back to Flag, like had intended to be out traveling and climbing all summer, and just went back to Flag, and my body felt destroyed. My brain obviously felt destroyed, and I was in a really dark place. I've struggled a lot with both addiction and various manifestations of self-harm, which is really common if you're taught that you're not a person that's like supposed to be taken care of. And I had done so much work to get through that and be in a healthier place, and was definitely like taking rapid steps back into those types of behaviors, and was just scared of that. And I really like sat down with myself and was, what are we going to do to make this sustainable? And that was the point where I really realized, first of all, needed to empty the duffel bag, and then figure out how I could live just in a body and in a community that felt sustainable. Yeah, it had definitely affected my climbing. It's a short answer to that.
You made announcements and then explained it, sounds like ad nauseum to people till you couldn't talk about it anymore. But now I have evidence, like I said when we sat down, that your climbing came back. Aside from I'm going to live open as this person, what other things did you put on track? I mean, what other if we're talking to people who are sitting there thinking about this, what else was the work you did?
So one of the things I started doing was medically transitioning, right, which involves different things for every person, but so something that not every trans person deals with, but a lot do, is body dysphoria, where your body just feels like, it's a different experience for everyone. But like, I like to explain, like, sometimes I would be like, I felt like I was in a rubber suit all the time, like just totally disembodied. And so there's a lot of different ways you can do that.
Yeah, but how did you climb like that?
It was terrible, right? Like, yeah, I mean,
were you able to focus away from that
sometimes
when you climb? But yeah, it sounds like it would have been really difficult.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, totally.
So you made some changes.
Yeah,
to try to make yourself feel at home in your meat sack.
Yeah, totally. And that's so huge, right? Because that was really scary for me in climbing. One of the things that, for instance, like taking hormones does, if you're transmasculine, it like you put on a lot of weight really quickly, and some of it's muscle mass, right? Like something like. But it's definitely not the type of muscle mass you like want as a climber. It's not like, all of a sudden your fingers get super strong, or like you can bench a bunch. It's like you can probably like squat more,
right?
Like, I don't know, maybe you can like lift more heavy shit. So I was really scared about doing that, but ultimately it was just like, I was like, I gotta just trust that whatever body I end up in is just gonna be able to rock climb whatever grade it can. And it's also going to be able to like live for the next many years.
Right.
Which like maybe wasn't the case with the body I was in before. And so that was scary for me, but just like doubled down on my training for climbing, like got really like made sure I just stayed psyched and like kept things in perspective. And ultimately like feeling at home in your body, like climbing is it's like dancing, right? Like you have to know where your body is and be able to like tune into it and listen to your intuition about how to move. And I felt so much more aware of what my body was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I wasn't trying to just like get as much distance from it all the time as possible. So that made a big difference in my climbing, honestly. And I had to get used to like, and I mean, I'm a small person. It wasn't like my body changed dramatically.
No, you're not. I'm not looking across it like some gym bro.
Totally, yeah. Like you also have to like do other things, like
Sure.
like taking. I think that's something that like people when they're talking about hormones and they're thinking about transition,
Right.
you're not taking steroids. Like you're not like just like getting jacked, right? It's like the changes are subtle, and it like for me it wasn't even like trying to get to the opposite gender. Like there's different ways you can affirm it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's not. Yeah, I'm definitely not like all of a sudden this like jacked human, but it did really change like the way I saw my body and the way I held myself and just my ability to feel comfortable in my skin.
Mm-hmm.
So that was huge for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So you made this choice and now you're, at least social media wise, and I think some of the work you're doing, you are an advocate. You are thinking about these kids out there who are going through the same, painful school experience or whatever happens to be that you did. Is that something you've also chosen, or was that, you're talking about how like you had to explain ad nauseum what you were talking about to these people. Is that something you chose, or did it also sort of just start happening as, again, you vocalized this idea or who you were?
That's a both and for sure. Like, I volunteer for an organization that helps queer youth specifically, like when they're in crisis. And so that is super intentional, right? It's like I'm there every week in some capacity to listen to these kiddos and interact with them and like just kind of be someone that they can go to, because a lot of them don't have someone, right? And that has been really important to me. And like, so that's really intentional. And I'm in grad school right now. I'm studying counseling, and which has been really cool. I've been able to like integrate a lot of body-based counseling, including climbing research, into what I'm doing. But that is also super intentional for being able to like advocate for better mental health services and kind of more ethical therapeutic movement spaces, like including, climbing is like quote unquote therapy, but it's not, right? Like we all know that you can use it as a way to heal, and you can also like, it can be used as not like the exact opposite of that.
Right, to avoid everything else in your life, for example.
So, yeah, exactly. So that's all like super intentional. But then the things that aren't as intentional, like the being the first of things.
Right.
If there's any way that you want to feel isolated, right? Like we were talking about this feeling of being like, am I the only person that has this gender identity? Is this just me? And then for there to be like headlines that are like, the first non-binary person to do this, you're like, yep, I am alone. Like, and that's not actually the case. Like it is inspiring for people to see that. But that's not something I would say that I've done super intentionally. Mm-hmm. But I think I've started to grow into it, of seeing. I got to run this rad meetup group the other day. I was teaching a Warriors Way clinic at a gym, and they asked me to run a meetup for the queer community at the gym after. It was so rad. We had like one person who came, and we were going around and just introducing ourselves, and I invited people to share their pronouns, and they're like, I've never shared my pronouns with people before, but I'm going to right now. And they they shared that they used different pronouns than their assigned ones.
Right.
And there was a team kid who like asked if she could attend, and like she was probably in her mid-teens, and she came, and she had never been around queer adults before.
Right.
And she got to see not only these adults that shared an identity to her, but they also shared this climbing identity with her. So she could really see herself in them, not just in me, like in the whole group of people. And I got a note from their team coach later that was like, she had never wanted to boulder before, and she just sent her first V6 yesterday, or something like that. I don't remember what the grade was, but like that she was just so much more embodied, right? And confident. It's so like things like that. If being the first of someone, or like being out there and putting myself out there, gives me the opportunity to be a part of community building and a part of those spaces, then it's worth it. It wouldn't be worth it if it was just like some headline that was giving me, like, I don't need that. That kind of publicity isn't what I actually want.
Well, you don't.
But...
That's thrust upon you.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
there's
that's
no
okay.
doubt about it.
Yeah.
Back to my comment that on a molecular level, you were the same person.
Totally.
From before and after. Yeah. It's also like, as a climber, you're talking about some physical changes, but we all have those. Deciding on what we want to do if we were going to start eating terrible food and way too much of it, where our bodies are going to change. So it's just an interesting thing that I understand this resistance to be the first of this, and like to have that identity thrust upon you, because again, you're the same climber you were, your same intentions, same motivations.
Yeah.
And so speaking of that, like what is like now, your sort of dream future climbing? Not necessarily specific goals, but what do you see yourself doing in climbing? Are you going to keep attacking these difficult trad routes, kind of sport style, where you work them, or, alpine climbing? What's it look like for you, do you think?
Yeah. There's like a couple very specific cracks that I'm just like, I have like pictures of them I used to have pictures in my apartment. I'm in a van now, so I
Is one under a bridge in Britain somewhere, or in England somewhere?
Totally, the underneath the bridge one is definitely on the list for sure.
Anyway, sorry.
I think like I really enjoy like single pitch crack projecting. I think it's really fun. It's probably like my biggest type 1 fun style of climbing. Mm-hmm. But I also this past fall had a project in Arizona that was like it was a 5-pitch like route that was like all the pitches basically were at my limit, and it was so fun to like work each pitch and then put it all together. And I actually was able to put it all together at the end of the season. So I'd love to do more stuff like that as well, kind of like work both sides of it. And then I always like to have a bouldering goal. Like that's something, because I just, bouldering is so hard for me. Like I don't know. I'm sure pretty much every crack climber that can, unless you like have a bouldering background, if you're someone that mostly trad climbs, like you go bouldering and you just are like, this isn't even rock climbing. What am I doing? This is so different.
Right.
Especially in Arizona, it's all roof bouldering. It's like limestone roof bouldering.
Right.
So I'd love to just like, that's something that's really fun because I always feel like a beginner. So those are like the 3 angles. I would say bouldering is more like, just because I think it's hilarious and I can see a lot of improvement from it. But mostly like steep splitter cracks and then longer stuff that lets me put all the steep splitter cracks together and do like big days out of those.
Right.
Less psyched on alpine climbing. Just, I think I'm just not around it as much because I live in the desert. Really like going and exploring in the desert and finding long things there.
And what do you expect from your sort of place in the community going forward? You said it was 2, now almost 3 years ago, that you sort of, I don't know, is coming out the right way to put it? That sounds more like a coming out of the closet kind of thing, but
totally.
Yeah.
I've thought of it as like peeking my head out of the shell.
Okay.
Like if you like think of, I've heard someone, Jacob Tobias, a writer who was writing about it, and they said they're like, it's like a snail. You're like a cute garden snail that like pokes your head out and then back in and back in. So you can say like you started coming out, right? Like 3 years ago, But
not, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is like, is this something you hope to continue sort of advocating and climbing and maybe growing that role as you go forward? Yeah,
definitely in climbing. I think like it's important to me because I think we have the most power to change our own community rather than like going out and trying to fix other communities. It's like we should just start at home. I think there is some defensiveness around wanting like people asking the climbing community to change because they're like, is the climbing community really that bad? And it's like, well, we're just asking our own community to change. Right. It's like, it'd be like if you're at the dinner table with your parents and they say something problematic and you're like, yo, don't say that. Or you like correct them and then they're like, but the neighbors across the street say such worse things. And you're like,
yeah, but
we can still be better.
Right.
And I think of that with the climbing community. It's like, I don't actually care if like other sports are less inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
I like when we're advocating for change, it's just because this is our community and we want it to be the best that it can be, because I mean, I care about being in the climbing community and I want to be proud of it. So I definitely think I'll keep like pushing for change in the climbing community. And then also I'm excited, actually working with the Warriors Way and then doing like this grad school thing. We're having more opportunities to use climbing as a resource for mental training and mental health with groups of people that aren't climbers, and even like kind of coach outside of the climbing realm.
Sure.
And so we're just like, I think there are a lot of issues in the queer community and just in a lot of populations that have experienced trauma that can't be solved just through rock climbing. And
Come on.
Yeah, I know.
Come on.
But I
don't,
like,
don't
so I
you
definitely
dare say that.
Yeah,
It cures
exactly.
everything.
It cures everything for sure. If you just climb hard enough and
Yeah,
for long enough.
Exactly.
If if it hasn't cured you yet, it's just because you haven't climbed hard enough,
right,
or long
exactly.
enough. But I'm excited to work in those lanes too. I think it's important to me. Like, I love climbing, and it is a big part of my life. Like, I don't only want to work through climbing, and that's not the only way I do connect with people right now. So it's definitely going to continue to be a huge part of my life. I just want to make sure that like I continue to grow in ways outside of climbing as well.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening, and thank you so much to Lor for sitting down with a relative stranger and being so open about their struggles. As is often the case with the Enormocast, I left the interview feeling better, feeling like I had sort of made a friend, and that I would like to get to know this person a lot better. And actually, Lor and I have some similar crack objectives, so hopefully we can meet up in the fall when things cool off again. And in the meantime, it's summertime, which means if you're going to Lander for the climbing festival on the 15th, I think is when it starts, 15th of July, I'll see you there. Still planning on heading up there. And finally, let this podcast be a lesson to us all. We don't know what that person climbing next to us has gone through recently or in their life. So the best thing to do is approach them with kindness, which can be hard at our crowded crags these days. But maybe, like Lor and I, you'll make a new friend. Sounds corny, but wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? Be careful out there and check your knots.
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
The teachers told me that's where it's at.